I'm Josh Fenton, CEO and co-founder, and it is Friday, heading into the weekend, but we've got Jennifer Lawless. She's the chair of the Political Science Department, the University of Virginia. Professor, there is big news happening in the world, but especially in Washington, D.C. this morning. Speaker wannabe Jim Jordan went down for the third time, and he is losing support, not gaining support. Walk us down into the halls of Congress and what is going on down there.
This is really quite incredible. The Republicans obviously had a hard time choosing a speaker in January when it took Kevin McCarthy 15 rounds. But each time McCarthy was either holding steady or gaining a little bit of support. Jim Jordan has now gone 3 rounds and he has consistently lost support each time. So in the most recent vote a few minutes ago, 25 Republicans voted against his speakership. He can only afford to lose, depending on how many people are in the chamber, between 3 and 5. And so Congress is at a standstill. Business cannot be conducted. The current acting speaker is empowered only to hold votes on electing a new speaker. And it's hard to imagine a worse time. We're approaching the precipice of a government shutdown. There's Ukraine aid that's hanging in the balance. And now the new conflict that we're seeing the U.S. get involved in the Middle East means that we need a functioning government. And one chamber of Congress is not functioning.
So what happens? I mean, we've never been here before. Does at some point some group of Republicans split off and say, for the single purpose of these 3 or 4 bills, we're going to break this logjam because we're Americans first. We're not Republicans first. We're Americans first. Or does this just go on and on, literally till Election Day?
Well, it seems that there are 2 options. One is the Republicans can come together. I mean, they've been engaged in these closed door meetings that don't seem to be working, but the Republicans can come together, say that there's no speaker that they love, but they're going to hold their noses, cast their votes for somebody so that they can actually get the people's business done. Or a bunch of them can try and, with Democrats, elect somebody else. But the Democrats are in a position where they don't want to be the people that elect a Republican Speaker of the House. And they're certainly not going to do it with no concessions. As far as I know, though, the Republicans are not really offering the Democrats anything. So the Democrats don't have much of an incentive to do this either. I guess a third strategy would be for the Democrats to try and peel off 5 Republicans to make Hakeem Jeffries Speaker. But that seems very implausible as well.
I mean, could this literally last till January of 2025?
I don't think so, because the government can't do anything. I mean, letting this last until after the next election would mean that there would basically be a government shutdown for almost a year, because they wouldn't be moving forward on any spending bills and they wouldn't be moving forward on any bills to keep the government open. So it's highly unlikely that that's going to be the case. I thought yesterday that there would have been a vote to empower Patrick McHenry to at least put forward for 30 days or for 60 days so that they could at least do some very important business. But that seems to be something that the Republicans were not willing to agree to either. The whole thing is really quite remarkable.
Could you start to see President Biden issuing more and more executive orders to fill the gap of Congress not taking action, with a complete understanding that he's doing it in the country's best interest, and let the legal fights then follow?
He can. That's much more difficult to do when it comes to actually appropriating money, though. So on policy, sure, executive orders could, sort of be the way to get stuff done. But when you're talking about actually sending aid and funding different programs, that's something that Congress literally has the power to do. They have the power of the purse. The president does not. So that can't be done through executive order. We've seen, though, this started last night during Biden's remarks about what's going on in the Middle East, that he is being very, very explicit in calling for various funding bills and calling on Congress to act. And if the Republicans are ultimately obstructionists in that process by failing to form a government, that's something that the Democrats are obviously going to be pointing to. The Democrats, I should note, had just as slim a majority when Nancy Pelosi was Speaker, and they were just as divided internally, yet they put their differences behind them and figured out how to move forward with the leadership team so that they could actually get things done. The Republicans don't seem to be able to coalesce behind somebody who can do that.
Now, the Democrats have the perfect opportunity politically to take advantage of this, but Democrats always find a way to kind of mess it up. We've got a couple members of the Democratic caucus who are defending false information about the bombing of the hospital in Gaza, and at least one of them standing by it, refusing to acknowledge that Israel was not responsible or appears not to be responsible for that attack. Is that going to be just one of those things that messes up the Democrats yet again?
It's always something, right? They can't they can't say yes to a good thing. I mean, also keep in mind, not having a government, I don't think is a good thing, but it's certainly something that the Democrats can't be blamed for right now.
Right.
Look, I think that there is definitely the Democratic coalition is hanging together. It's tethered together by, bubble gum. And it was just a matter of time before there were a group of people who would peel off for one reason or another. I'm hopeful that this will not be that reason. It's hard to imagine a better speech than Joe Biden gave last night, trying to thread the needle in terms of backing Israel as an ally, but also highlighting the difficulties that the Palestinian people are facing and differentiating Palestinian citizens from Hamas terrorists. But that's all contingent on people actually believing intelligence and believing information, even when it might not comport with their priors. And we're beginning to see at least some Democrats, fall victim to that problem.
And the war hasn't even begun. I mean, Israel has not invaded Gaza yet. That's going to change the dynamic dramatically. There are going to be significantly more deaths. There's going to be more tragedies. There's going to be deaths on both sides at a much higher rate. And there's a chance with 2 carriers and missile capabilities of Hamas that the U.S. could easily be sucked into this thing.
Oh, and it's hard to envision how there's any good outcome, but it's not only 2 missile carriers and sucking the U.S. in, it's also Hezbollah in Lebanon and the extent to which Iran wants to get involved from the southern part of the Middle East. And so it's generally terrible. And it's terrible because there's so much uncertainty. And this is also the first time where I think there was this general sense that Israel might have been invincible. That's obviously not the case. So that in some ways also empowers various terrorist organizations. One thing I do want to note, though, is that originally Israel gave Palestinians in Gaza 24 hours to move south before they were going to attack. And I think it's important to give credit to the United States, the United Nations, Joe Biden and his administration for working with Netanyahu and working with the Israeli army and government to understand that that was not a feasible 24-hour deadline. Like, if the Israelis don't want to be in a position where they're seen as, engaging in the same kind of atrocities that the terrorists did 2 weeks ago, they've got to give people an opportunity to move. Now, granted, they're giving millions of people a terrible opportunity to move under terrible conditions, but Israel's restraint and not going in represents a marked departure from what Netanyahu probably wanted. And the Biden administration and the United Nations deserve credit for that.
In our last 2 minutes, the story that has been wildly underplayed is the decision by Sidney Powell to plead guilty in the Georgia case as a contingent to that agreement. One, she won't face jail time. She'll be on probation for 6 years. But she has to testify in all of these cases. She is a key Rosetta Stone to what was going on in the White House. Talk about the implications that not only in Georgia, but also on these other cases around the country.
Well, assuming that she's going to tell the truth, and I think, again, this is an important assumption because up until now, she generally has not. Her plea deal basically had her reverse her statements about everything regarding election interference in Georgia and the gathering of information and voting machines. But assuming that she is going to tell the truth and that she provided credible information to strike this deal, Donald Trump and his various co-defendants have to be quite worried because she was one of the few people that were privy to specific conversations and reactions of Donald Trump before, during, and after January 6th. So this is not good news for any of those defendants, and it's certainly not good news for Donald Trump.
Yeah, this, we've got major issues in Congress, in the Middle East, and in the Ukraine. This sort of broke in the cover of darkness, but could have huge implications. It's got to be a nightmare scenario for Donald Trump and his defense teams as they're trying to understand what the implications of that is.
The other thing that I would note is that this makes it also a lot more likely that other people will strike deals as well. So she's now the second who have cut a deal. As the trials and as jury selection nears and as dates get set, there are going to be more and more people who fall into this category. And Donald Trump is going to likely be one of a handful of the last men standing. And there's going to be a pretty substantial arsenal of people who can refute what he says and who can attest to what he said and did and reacted during that time. So, this is it's not good news for Donald Trump. Of course, he's also been violating numerous gag orders, so he might be in jail or under house arrest in the near future anyway.
Jennifer Lawless, the chair of the Political Science Department at the University of Virginia, thank you so much for joining us on Friday, giving us the insight on what's going on down in the U.S. Capitol. For everybody else, stay tuned. There's a lot of news. If you haven't seen the update, GoLocal broke this morning. That very, so we call them privileged couple down in Barrington who are involved with the Newport wedding melee. Their charges got up. They are now facing a total of 11 charges. And 2 of those, Rachel Oenick is facing 2 felony charges for trying to grab police officers' guns. Stay tuned for much more coverage on that and on everything else. Thanks, everybody.